Alright guys, here is the explanation from the 10.7 day 2 worksheet. So a lot of you had a question on number 5, and I think I know why you had a question on number 5. It was because of this negative angle. So what I need you to be careful about with the negative angles, you have one of two choices. You could graph that and figure out where it's located. But the problem is it's not on your plate, so you'd have to end up converting it anyway. So if I did a quick graph of it, that would actually end up being this line. So you could take that line and figure out what line that is on your plate, or you can think about what we did to find other representations here, and you could just add 2 pi onto this, and that will give you something that is on the plate. Then we get 2 pi over 3, which is still that same line if you were to look on your plate and we went that direction. So either way, you got to figure out which quadrant you're looking at on your plate and use that. So if I want to find x right now, to find x, my formulas are cosine theta. R is 2, and then I'm going to do cosine of, I'm going to use the 2 pi over 3 instead of the negative 4 pi over 3, just because that is on my plate. And then I'm just plucking that value off of my plate. That should be negative 1/2. And then that gives me that x is negative 1. And then to find y, I have to do r sine theta. That's going to be 2 times the sine of 2 pi over 3, which is 2 times the sine of 2 pi over 3 is radical 3 over 2. And we just simplify there, the 2's will cancel, you get radical 3. So that's how you get an answer of negative 1, comma, radical 3. It's really working to make sure for that negative 1, I would just find that other representation so that way I do have a value that is on my plate. Alright, let's take a look at number 8. Pardon me. So number 8, to find x, we're going to do r cosine theta. And we know r is 1.5, and here's what's weird about this one. We don't have something that's on the plate. So what I need you to do is you're going to use your calculator, but you have to be in radian mode on your calculator. So just make sure you're in radian mode before you go to type this in. If you didn't fix that on Thursday, it will give you a completely different answer when you type it in. So that's, I'm just going to type that whole thing in the calculator and get the answer. And you get negative 1.295, so it's going to bump up to 30. And then for y, we'll do our sine theta. So y is going to be 1.5 times the sine of 3.67. Again, I'm just typing that in my calculator. And then you should get negative 0.76. So that gives me the rectangular coordinate is negative 1.30, comma negative 0.76. Alright, let's try some from the back. We're going to look at the whole bottom section here. I'm just going to go over all of them. So if you don't need all of them, just skip to the ones that you need. So here is 13. So we're trying to go from rectangular to polar. So we're trying to change it to r's and thetas. So if I want to find r, the formula for r is square root of x squared plus y squared. So for r, for this one, that's going to be the square root of negative radical 3 squared plus radical 3 squared. So when I square negative radical 3, it comes out to just positive 3. This also comes out to positive 3, which means I get the square root of 6, and I can't simplify that at all, so that's r. I think most of you seem to be struggling from what I've heard with the tangent theta part. So if I write that out for this one, when you do tangent theta, the order you have to do it has to be y over x, because tangent, remember, is sine over cosine. Excuse me, and sine goes with y, cosine goes with x. So tangent theta is going to be radical 3 over negative radical 3. And if I reduce that, I just get negative 1. But now you need to make sure you're looking in the correct quadrant to pick that from your plate, because there's 2 spots where tangent is negative 1. It's negative 1 at 3 pi over 4 and also at 7 pi over 4. So I need to look at the original quadrant of that original point that they gave me. That would be over to the left and up. It would end up in the second quadrant. So I want to pick the theta that ends up also in the second quadrant. So I want the 3 pi over 4 as my answer. So the coordinate turns into radical 6 comma 3 pi over 4. All right, let's look at 14. So 14, first to find r, just watch your math here. This is negative radical 4 radical 3 squared plus negative 4 squared. When you're squaring those negatives, make sure they're coming out positive. And then when you're squaring, whoops, it's supposed to say squaring. When you're squaring this guy, you should be distributing to both of those. So that's really 16 times 3. So this should turn into 48 plus 16. So you get the square root of 64, which means r is 8. And then to find tangent, excuse me guys, tangent of theta, we're going to do y over x again. So that's going to be tangent of theta is equal to negative 4 over negative 4 radical 3. And I get tangent theta is equal to, those are going to cancel, and we'll get positive 1 over radical 3. But that's not on your plate, so you need to make sure you rationalize it. And you get tangent theta is radical 3 over positive 3. And then again, I need to look at what quadrant this original angle was in, or not original angle, original point was in. That rectangular point would be in the third quadrant because it's left and down. So I need to make sure I'm picking from the third quadrant which one has an answer of radical 3 over 3, and that's going to be 7 pi over 6. So my answer is 8 comma 7 pi over 6. So let's look at these bottom ones. These bottom ones you've got to use your calculator for. So r hopefully was easy on the bottom ones because they're actually perfect square numbers. So this ends up being the square root of 289, and you get r is equal to 17. But to find theta, you've got to make sure you're doing this in the right order. Again, you have to do y over x, so it'd be 15 over 8. And then you're just typing this in your calculator, but please make sure you're in radian mode like we talked about on the last problems. So I'm doing tan negative 1, tan inverse of 15 divided by 8, and that's where I get an answer of 1.08 for theta. Since the original point would be in the first quadrant, I don't have to do anything to that. What my calculator is giving me is correct. So I get 17 comma 1.08. But if I look at 16, that's where it gets a little bit different. So let's do r real quick. It's negative 4 squared plus negative 3 squared. I think some of you knew already it was 3, 4, that this is going to end up being 5, but just in case, you get 25 if you add those together. R is really 5. And then to find theta, tangent of theta would be y over x, which is negative 3 over 4. And then to solve for theta, I've got to do the inverse tangent. That's my cat being very vocal. You get 0.64. But here's the problem. That original point is in the third quadrant. 0.64 would not end up in the third quadrant. That's just going to end up right here in the first quadrant if I graphed it. It's between 0 and 1.57, which is pi over 2. So I need to figure out how to get it to go over here in this quadrant, and that's where you have to think about how much you have to add on to get into that opposite quadrant. To get into the opposite quadrant, you're going to have to add on pi. So we're going to add on pi, which really means with decimals we're adding on 3.14. So that's how you get that theta is 3.78. So your point for this last one should have been 5 comma 3.78. Alright, I hope that explanation helps. If it doesn't, I am going to be posting some office hour times where if we need to, we can do a little bit more face-to-face time. If you really need to help, usually that will happen after 2:30. So if you send me a message on Hangouts, we can do some face-to-face time after 2:30 for anything else you need help with. Alright, hang in there, guys. We're going to get through this together. It's not going to be pretty every day, but we're going to make it, I promise. See you guys, or I'll talk to you guys soon.